Welcome to Everything Casual, bringing you original football casual videos from the golden era of the 80s and 90s, right up to current day. Football away day stories and historic clashes between football firms. Subscribe so you don't miss out. We upload videos every week. Today we are looking at the history of the very famous and notorious Millwall firms and individuals throughout the years. F-Troop, Treatment, Bushwhackers, the Millwall Berserkers, Harry the Dog and Tiny. Normally, in my videos, I reference interviews by football lads of that firm or use books. But Millwall are different. None of their lads do interviews or books. Anyway, let's jump straight in. Millwall have a historic association with football hooliganism, which came to prevalence in the 70s and 80s, with a firm known originally as F-Troop, eventually becoming more widely known as the Millwall Bushwhackers, who were one of the most notorious hooligan gangs in England. The first instance of trouble came to the fore during a game against Brentford in November 1965, when a grenade was thrown onto the pitch from the Brentford end. While the grenade itself was harmless, the action led to a riot amongst the fans of the clubs involved. Harry the Dog was the leader of Millwall's notorious F-Troop during the 70s, and the most feared football hooligan of his generation. He was also at the forefront of many of the fistfights, pitch battles and gang warfare that broke out between rival football firms in that era. According to a Millwall lad called Hobbsio, this is how Harry the Dog got his nickname. aka David Triggs, got the nickname Harry the Dog due to him walking his dog and bringing him into the Glengall Tavern in Peckham, with the dog always wearing a wool blue and white scarf. But let's look at what Dave Triggs aka Harry the Dog had to say himself, and a bit of insight into his early days as he reveals some of his history and backstory. The following are all Harry the Dog's own words. I wound up working as a bouncer on the doors of a local pub called the Squire, and fighting was the one thing that I was good at, and at 6'2", I really looked the part. I was also working at the roughest pub in Millwall, which was good news for the management because many of the regulars had gone to my school and knew of my fierce reputation. Word soon got around that Harry the Dog was manning the doors, and people would be very unwise to go there and take liberties. I also became quite pally with the rest of the bouncers, many of whom were either black or of Irish origin. We would get a takeaway after work and then go to someone's house to watch a video and down some beers. One night after work, I met up with the O'Connor brothers. They were in their early 20s and both showed promise as boxers. We had a curry at the local Indian, but they wouldn't come back and watch some videos as they were off to Ireland in the morning to visit their mother and wanted a good night's sleep. As they made their way to their car, they were confronted by a group of lads they had clashed with a couple of weeks earlier. I saw what was happening and sneaked up behind them before shouting, "Awoe!" and stormed into the lot of them, sending them fleeing for their lives. That encounter sealed a bond of friendship with the O'Connor brothers that would last a lifetime. We would go up to the West End every Wednesday to chill out and chat up the local girls, but more importantly, they had strong links to the Millwall lads. Every Saturday, they would make their way to the Dog and Gun, a 5-minute walk from the den, wearing the latest fashion and tooled up with knives, hammers and other weapons concealed in their jackets, and wait for the rest of the firm, as football gangs called themselves, to turn up. Then they would head off to the game. My first foray into the hooligan world took place inside the Dog and Gun. Millwall was playing Southampton at home, and I told the O'Connor brothers that I would meet them there, along with the rest of my gang. We were just walking up the road to the pub when I spotted some kid on a bike staring at me with an odd expression on his face. Then he ditched his bike and ran into the pub. We carried on walking, and then all of a sudden I heard a lot of yelling and screaming, and a gang of youths came storming out of the pub. I thought that they had come out to welcome us to the firm and let out a huge "Awoo" in mock salute, but as it turned out, I was wrong. The kid on the bike was what was known as a spotter, somebody who kept watch outside of a pub to stop a rival firm sneaking up and taking the occupants by surprise. He had mistaken us for members of a rival firm. That could have been problematic, particularly as the O'Connor brothers had not yet arrived to vouch that we were Millwall and not their opponents. But as it happened, my war cry was quite infamous in Millwall, and it didn't take long for people to realise who I was and back off as I brushed past them and entered the pub. Every Millwall lad in the pub greeting me and accepted me into the group. All proper lads. All but one. There was one that didn't greet me. He was cocky, and I don't know what his problem was with me. But he knew I was not going to back down. He could see it in my eyes. But he didn't know what to do about it. Normally, he would just lash out with his fists when somebody faced up to him, as he had no doubt done in the past. But there was something about me that was telling him that would be a mistake, a very bad mistake, and so he did nothing, as much as he wanted to. Suddenly, the doors of the pub burst open, and the kid I had spotted earlier rushed in. "There's a mob heading this way," he yelled, "and I think they are Southampton's firm." That did it. The man stopped staring at me and headed for the door. "Let's get the bastards," he yelled over his shoulder. I smiled to myself. He was trying to make out that the reason he was walking away was because a rival firm had turned up and wanted to fight them. But I knew better. I had scared him, and he didn't want to fight me. I saw it in his eyes. Outside the pub, the lads were yelling and screaming at the Southampton mob, who were about 40 strong, roughly the same number we had. I pushed people out of the way as I made my way to the front. The mug stood there, and it was obvious he was the leader of Millwall's firm, by the way everybody was following him and standing behind him. I stood next to him, and he glared at me angrily, before looking away quickly and back at the Southampton mob, as I said I had frightened him. Meanwhile, Southampton's mob were yelling and screaming, but doing nothing more, so I decided to take things in my own hands. I yelled out my trademark war cry, before dashing forward and steaming into the lot of them. The Millwall lot were taken aback at first, but soon came steaming behind me, and laying into our rivals, and fights were breaking out everywhere. The Millwall leader was lashing out in all directions, and putting up a good show. I saw him headbutt one guy, and then follow through with a kick to the balls. I also saw him pull out a hammer and smash it into the face of an oncoming skinhead. Most of my time, however, was focused on knocking out members of Southampton's firm. I just knocked out one after another, either with my fists or boots. One geezer came up behind me and tried to put me in a headlock. I punched him so hard in the kidneys that he yelped and loosened his grip instantly. I surged forward as if to take a rugby kick and then kicked him hard in the balls. He flew through the air and wound up on the ground, yelping in even more pain. Then I turned to my left, with my fists clenched. I didn't know who was friend or foe. One hooligan looked very much like another to me. Then I heard the sound of police sirens. So that was it. Both mobs were running in opposite directions, us to the pub, and them to God knows where. The only people that did not run were those hooligans on both sides, who were either laying flat out on the pavement, or were too injured or dazed to run. Back in the pub, I was buzzing. I had taken part in my first hooligan ruck, and enjoyed every moment of it. Robbo and the rest of my gang were buzzing too. They had followed me into battle and come off best, just as I had. Then, the leader walked back in the pub, and the place once again fell silent. Everybody was wondering if we were going to continue where we had left off. I was wondering that too, put my glass down, and fixed him with a firm stare. It wasn't the same as before, however. I had seen him fighting, and my respect for him had gone up. He had been there in the thick of it, and put up a good show in the process. I think he sensed that my respect for him had gone up, because his face softened up, and he came over with his hand outstretched. "You fought well, Harry," he said, his face breaking into a grin, "and you certainly live up to your reputation. Now I see why they call you Harry the Dog." "So, you know who I am," I said sarcastically. "Yet you asked me who I was earlier?" He glared at me, and then noticing the slight twinkle in my eyes, his grim features lit up. I asked him who he was. "Bomber," he replied, shaking my hand, "and I led this firm." It wasn't long before I knew all of Millwall's firm by name, and who were the key players. People like Bobby the Wolf, so called because he liked to gouge his opponent's eyes out with his claws. Mad Pat, who lived up to his name because he really was as mad as a Hatter Winkle, or Wee Von Winkle as we called him, because he liked to sleep a lot. And Higgsy, who could make everyone laugh, even when he was trying not to, Gary Roberts and Billy Plummer. These were some of the main faces at Millwall at the time, or F Troop, as they were better known because hooligan firms like to give themselves grand-sounding names.
All of a sudden, during the game, we started fielding billiard balls. Terrible. They were throwing billiard balls into the director's box, and people were getting cut. This was something else. This was the most menacing ever.
When the game finished, when the players sprinted off, the fans just ran on, and that was mayhem. supporters, or so they would call themselves, they're not, have gone across and started to throw seats out of the stand, adding to the scene of devastation and unrest which the police are trying to control.
I remember the ones with the seats, they were stamping on those and breaking them, and they came off in plastic pieces, and then they started frisbeeing them at us.
Just look at this. Absolutely disgraceful.
It's something I've never seen before in my life. And you thought, well, what are the consequences of all this, and how many people are going to be seriously hurt?
Dreadful scenes at Kenilworth Road. And this is what British football has got to contend with now.
I got hit on the back of the knee with one of these pieces of concrete. So I remember being on the floor and thinking, I'm going to be run over and that there's going to be a crowd come running across me and this is it. So I do vividly remember being on the ground and being very frightened.
There's a black and white photo from that night. It shows a young Andy being helped off the pitch by two stewards. He was clutching his leg.
My father was a police officer as well. And my parents, they were watching the TV that night.
And there's been crowd trouble at tonight's FA Cup quarter-final tie between Luton and Millwall. Supporters climbed partitions.
And the picture used in the news was that picture of me being helped by the two stewards. And my mother said to my dad, yeah, that looks like our Andrew. And he said, no. So he said he won't be there, he's working nights. And then a few minutes later, after the news had been on, they had a phone call from a senior officer in Luton who said, that is Andrew, but he's all right.
The town and the club were both left to pick up the pieces. Here's manager David Pleat again.
We were so depressed. It was so bad. I've never been that way where I've actually won a game and felt so kind of distraught.
The numbers say it all. 47 injured, including 33 police officers, 31 arrests and 15 grand's worth of damage to that stadium.
There was a level of violence which was normal for a Saturday, which was we used to get punched and kicked. But at that match, I remember it was a level above that. It just felt like they really wanted to hurt you. A police officer had nearly died and had been resuscitated. And the guy that was resuscitating him was being punched and kicked at the time.
Government papers from the time described scenes more like a war zone than a football match. Gashes to heads and faces, some left unconscious from blows to the head. The government had to act. One of Margaret Thatcher's advisors was Hartley Booth.
Everyone was outraged, Mrs Thatcher was outraged, and the FA were actually summoned to number 10 and...
Before we go into the section about the Bushwackers firm, I would like to delve into a myth that has surrounded Millwall for decades. In some circles, Millwall have a reputation for having racist fans. In fact, the club and area as a whole seems to have that reputation to outsiders, or even anyone not from that particular area of London. I am not Millwall. I had also heard of that reputation. I don't know where and when it started. Maybe it was because in the late 70s and throughout the 80s, black players would receive nasty racist chants at the Den and get pelters along with the usual appalling offensive monkey chants. Yes, they would. But in Millwall's defence, those kinds of vile chants that have no place in society were happening at every football ground in the country. Every Saturday, it wasn't just at the Den. Maybe it was intensified at Millwall, because the crowd there was one of the most intimidating in the UK. I'm actually not sure the myth is true. There is no evidence to say that Millwall are racist. In fact, there is evidence to claim the total opposite. We have just listened all about F-Troop leader Harry the Dog, one of the most intimidating, fierce, passionate football lads around at the time. And this is what he had to say about racism. This is how he feels about it in his own words, in a direct quote. One Saturday, me, Robbo and the rest of the gang had gone up there to watch Millwall play Liverpool, but the amount of racial abuse dished out to the black players was disgusting, so I and the gang stormed out of the stadium in disgust. So that quote was by the actual leader of F-Troop, but here is another quote from Harry the Dog. I also became good friends with the rest of the bouncers, who were mostly black or of Irish origin, and they became friends for life, like brothers. Now, there's another myth about Millwall, and this one I am not able to say if it's true or not, but maybe some Millwall lads can clear this up in the comment section for us all, It could be completely untrue, I don't know. The myth is that back in the day, Millwall and Celtic had an alliance. The lads of both firms were pally, and sometimes Millwall lads would travel up to Scotland for Celtic games, and Celtic lads would travel down to show their support for Millwall also. Celtic are notoriously a left-wing club with very strong connections and roots to Ireland. So if that particular myth about Millwall and the Celtic lads is true, then for me it shows a different light to the Millwall reputation completely. But all that is rumour, so let's actually deal with facts. This is fact-based information that I was able to find about Millwall and Celtic. In the 80s, there was a notable alliance between some fans of Celtic and Millwall, particularly within the football firm culture. While not a formal or official alliance, a shared sense of rebellious working-class identity and a focus on football hooliganism created a connection between some of these groups. Both Celtic and Millwall fans, especially within their firm groups, were often associated with a strong working-class identity, a sense of being outsiders, and a rejection of mainstream society. The 80s saw a peak in football hooliganism in the UK, and both Celtic and Millwall had firm groups that were active in this scene. While not formally allied, there were instances where some Celtic and Millwall fans were seen together or shared a sense of camaraderie. So we have listened to how Harry the Dog felt about racism, and he was one of the leaders of F Troop and very influential. But what we also have to take into consideration in the whole Millwall are racist debate is when the Bushwackers firm was at their peak, one of their main lads was black, Tiny. Ian Tiny Garwood was a beloved and respected figure in the Millwall Football Club community, particularly known for his role as a big daddy figure who looked out for younger fans. He passed away from cancer in December 2012, and his memory continues to be celebrated, especially among Millwall fans. R.I.P. Tiny, and I plan on doing a future video just based on Tiny's story, so if anyone would like to contribute stories towards that, please get in touch. I would value your input. In fact, here is a very famous pic of the Millwall Bushwhackers. You can see how diverse the firm was, with many black lads, and at that particular time, I am talking the very early days of football casuals, other than the Zulus, Man City Governors, Gooners, and a few others. Not many firms had as many black lads, but the Bushwhackers did. But that was a long time ago. If we are looking at timelines more current, then just have a look at Millwall lad Stephen Eldridge, a very well-respected figure of the football scene, and he has been quite vocal on his feelings about racism and has publicly voiced his disagreement on some of the views of Tommy Robinson. Very recently, a YouTuber called DKTV made a video called "I went to the most racist football club in the world," and I think the point of the video was that he had heard about the myth that Millwall were racist, and he went to investigate, and actually, in the video, by the end he is pleasantly surprised, and found no evidence whatsoever that Millwall are racist. In fact, it seemed the total opposite. I will leave a link in the description if any of you wish to watch that YouTube video. We also have to consider the part of London that Millwall is in. It is a vibrant multicultural place with many races, religions and cultures all together, living in harmony, so surely racists would not be welcome there. In my opinion, and it is just my opinion, I think what has happened is there are many passionate working class Millwall lads that have wrongly been labelled racist or right-wing by the media, just because they believe the powers that be are not doing right by them, working hard, long hours and grafting, but not seeing any gains. Or, like myself, feel very strongly against topics like grooming and rape gangs or terrorism. To have those views does not make you a racist. In fact, we should all be aware that grooming and rape gangs and terrorist attacks are carried out by people from all races and religions. It doesn't belong to just one. Personally, I stand against all them. I don't care what race or religion you are. If you are involved in any of those hideous crimes, then you are scum, full stop, and all the black and Asian lads of my mob agree. Millwall have even had the name of a weapon named after them, and seem to be the genius inventors of what would become a very useful tool to unsuspecting rivals back in the day, and inflicted a lot of pain and damage. The Millwall brick. A Millwall brick, or bat, is an improvised weapon made from a folded newspaper used as a club. It gained notoriety due to its association with football hooliganism, particularly among Millwall lads and supporters, and was reportedly used at football matches in the 60s and 70s in England. The weapon's popularity stemmed from the ease of its construction and the availability of newspapers, as well as the difficulty in restricting their entry into stadiums. A Millwall brick is constructed from several newspaper sheets stacked and tightly rolled lengthwise. The resulting tube is then bent in half to create a handle, a haft, and a rounded head at the fold. In the late 60s, in response to football hooliganism at matches in England, police began confiscating any objects that could be used as weapons. These items included steel combs, pens, beer mats, horse brasses, polo mints, shoelaces, and boots. However, fans were still permitted to bring in newspapers. Larger broadsheet newspapers work best for a Millwall brick, and the police looked with suspicion at working-class football fans who carried such newspapers. Because of their more innocent appearance, tabloid newspapers became the preferred choice for Millwall bricks. The Book Spirit of '69, a skinhead Bible, describes the use of Millwall bricks by British football hooligans in the late 1960s. Newspapers were rolled up tightly to form the so-called Millwall brick, and another trick was to make a knuckle duster out of pennies held in place by a wrapped around paper. You could hardly be pulled up for having a bit of loose change in your pocket and a Daily Mirror under your arm. The book Skinhead says, "The Millwall brick, for example, was a newspaper folded again and again and squashed together to form a kosh." Anyway, let's get back on track and delve into the Millwall Bushwhackers. By the late 70s, F Troop evolved into the Millwall Bushwhackers, who became one of the most notorious hooligan firms in the UK during the 80s and 90s. Their reputation for violence and confrontations, both inside and outside stadiums, contributed significantly to Millwall's infamous image. The name Bushwhackers is believed to stem from the group's aggressive and unexpected attacks, often targeting rivals in a surprise or ambush-like fashion, resembling a bushwhack in a metaphorical sense. Let's listen to what Millwall fanatic and actor Frank Harper has to say. Frank's old man played for Millwall, and Frank himself danced a few times with the Bushwhackers and was present for many of their biggest battles. He has seen it all, and this is what he had to say. Frank Harper has recounted a bone-chilling street brawl between Millwall and Leeds United hooligans on the streets of London. The Den and Elland Road were no-go zones for rival fans during the 80s and 90s, dominated by some of the most feared football firms in the country, and whenever the two teams locked horns, mayhem often ensued. Despite their geographical distance, the hatred between Millwall and Leeds supporters comes down to a simple fact that they dislike one another. I was in a pub and suddenly it emptied. The ones that couldn't get out the door were climbing out the toilet windows to get out onto the street. Thousands of Millwall came out of nowhere as bottles and glasses rained down on the Leeds lot. The old Bill pulled a transit van across the pub doorway to try to stem the flow of Millwall fans. That day, Leeds were dead lucky to reach the ground. Let's listen to some other key incidents and battles that the Bushwhackers participated in. In August 1993, Millwall relocated to the new Den and ended that season third in Division 1, entering the playoffs to try and win a place in the FA Premier League. However, they were eliminated in the playoff semi-finals by Derby County, and the game at the new Den had to be halted twice due to pitch invasions by Millwall hooligans. There was also widespread fighting in the stands. On 2 May 2002, after the Division 1 playoffs brought another semi-final exit for Millwall, almost 100 police officers were injured when Millwall hooligans attacked them with missiles in the stadium and in the streets surrounding it. This was one of several major incidents involving Millwall hooligans during the 2001 season. On 4th August 2001, just before the season began, Millwall hooligans clashed with those of Tottenham Hotspur outside the Caulkers public house in Bermondsey, in which there were dozens of injuries. The casualties included 30 police officers, 3 horses, and a man who needed treatment for stab wounds. 17 days later, also in London, Millwall fans ran riot in the streets surrounding the Den and caused damage to buildings and vehicles, as well as throwing missiles at police officers after a Football League Cup tie with Cardiff City. 4 days afterwards, some 250 Millwall hooligans attacked Burnley fans as they arrived at Bermondsey railway station for a league game. On 31st October, a similar number of Millwall hooligans rampaged in Wolverhampton before a league clash with Wolverhampton Wanderers, which resulted in 2 Wolves fans suffering facial stab wounds. On the 13th December, some 100 Millwall and Portsmouth hooligans clashed at the Windmill Public House near Waterloo Railway Station. Every window in the building was smashed, and most of the fixtures and fittings were damaged or destroyed, but all of the hooligans escaped before police could arrest them. On the 16th March, Millwall hooligans pelted visiting Sheffield Wednesday fans with bricks and bottles during a league match at the Den. 2 police officers were hospitalised as a result of the incident. In February 2011, Millwall fans threw missiles onto the pitch during a Football League Championship fixture against Middlesbrough at the New Den, which almost led to the game being called off. A club spokesman warned in a statement released to the national press that anyone found guilty of involvement in the missile throwing will be banned from the New Den for life. In October 2004, during a Football League Cup tie at home to Liverpool, Millwall fans taunted their Liverpool counterparts with songs making fun of the Hillsborough disaster, which had claimed the lives of 96 Liverpool fans in 1989. This escalated into violent clashes between fans of the 2 teams. 7 months later, 3 Liverpool fans received 3-month prison sentences, and a further 2 avoided prison sentences but received banning orders. 3 Millwall fans received 3-month prison sentences and 6-year banning orders. Millwall also have a fierce rivalry with the Birmingham Zulus. The Bushwackers and Zulus were 2 of the most violent firms around in those days, and their clashes were just as nasty. This is what one article had to say about one of the clashes. Police were yesterday considering taking the unprecedented step of suing a football club for the behaviour of its fans after violence erupted outside Millwall's ground. 47 officers were injured in the most violent football disturbance seen in Britain for years, following the South London club's defeat by Birmingham City on Thursday. Fans hurled bricks, paving stones, flares and thunder flash explosives at police lines in what officers believe was a planned riot. The disturbance, which lasted an hour and a half, is the latest in a series of incidents this season at Millwall and other grounds, which have led many to fear a return to the violence which plagued football in the 70s. Trouble began outside Millwall's ground, the New Den in Bermondsey, South East London, after the club's last-minute defeat in the semi-final of the First Division playoffs. While the Birmingham fans were kept in the ground, 900 hooligans attacked the police. Missiles were aimed at officers, and residents cowered in their homes as cars were set on fire. When the thugs ran out of missiles, they ripped up a playground and threw paving stones at officers. 9 police officers needed treatment for injuries, including a broken leg, arm and foot. Every member of a 21-strong unit from the Territorial Support Group, which is trained to deal with riots, was injured. 26 police horses were also injured, and one, called Alamein, nearly died when a thunder flash exploded beneath it, causing it to rear and sever an artery in its leg as it smashed into a car. Reinforcements were drafted in to back up the 250 officers who had been policing the game. Ian Blair, Metropolitan Police Deputy Commissioner, said he would meet the club's officials before deciding if the force should seek compensation for officers' injuries and the cost of the operation. Chief Superintendent Mike Humphrey, who led the police operation, said, "Millwall has always been a difficult club, and last night it disgraced itself." Mr. Humphrey, who described the trouble as recreational violence, said he was convinced the troublemakers came from inside the stadium after the match. He said the explosives must have been stored somewhere during the game, as it would have been impossible to take them into the stadium, suggesting the riot had been planned. 7 people, including 2 from Birmingham, who travelled to the match despite being banned from football games, were arrested. However, police are now poring over video footage and expect to make more arrests. Millwall FC has worked hard to rid itself of its violent image, but this season there has been a spate of clashes. More than 140 supporters have been prosecuted so far this season, 43 of them for violent disorder. Regular visitors to the new den say the police have had to work hard to keep Millwall fans from getting to the supporters of other clubs. When they have been unable to reach rival fans, they have turned on the police. So far, during this video, we have heard from the Millwall perspective, and we have just listened to a police article about the Millwall firm. Let's now listen to what the top lads from Birmingham Zulus had to say about Millwall. This is the actual words direct from the Zulus. "It was not the done thing for a firm to take a huge load of lads to Millwall. It just didn't happen. They were notorious, but when we went there in November 1986, it was one of the biggest ever away firms of Zulus travelling down to London. Around 1,000 lads made the journey, and it was most Zulus' first encounter with them. It was unknown territory, as they were a sort of an enigma, but as the blues firm was in its prime, Millwall were a target, and many couldn't wait to meet them. Everyone knew to go to their place at all was a major event, but to take big numbers was a milestone. I set 2 alarm clocks to make sure I wouldn't miss it. We took one of Birmingham's biggest away firms, with more than 1,000 lads. We took them by surprise, which they admit, but have claimed that we didn't let them know we were coming. You didn't need to be a rocket scientist in those days to know that blues would turn out at Millwall. They saw the firm we took to Villa Park when they played them there, so surely they were expecting us to turn out at the Den. We didn't travel to London in big numbers. Everyone was told to make their own way there and get to Victoria. The meeting place was Shakes. The Old Bill were waiting for us at Euston, but not many went by train, so choosing Victoria paid off. In Shakes, there were discussions about what route we were going to take. With a firm of that size, the only way I could see was to go straight in, and no messing about on the tubes trying to outwit the Old Bill. If Millwall were out, only one thing was going to happen. So that's what we did. We went straight in. We caught the main line train from Victoria to New Cross. The Old Bill hadn't sussed us at Victoria. Everyone was on best behaviour in Shakes, and there was no thieving. Everyone was there for one thing. I don't think the pub ever sold as much orange juice as they did that day. Even the lads, who usually have a drink, were on the pop, and there wasn't the usual whiff of draw in the air. When we got to New Cross, the Old Bill were there but not in big numbers, and we made our way to the Den. Millwall were nowhere to be seen. The odd few that were there soon scattered. As we marched to the ground, the Old Bill's numbers grew, and they managed to contain us for a while under a railway bridge. They started searching people, and all you could hear was all kinds of tools hitting the ground. A full arsenal of weapons was left under that bridge. As the lads came through the arches, a few Millwall appeared, and a bit of banter ensued, before two others came forward and approached Blues in front of the police. The blokes, who were in their mid to late 30s, acknowledged the Zulus' presence and told them to turn out at Covent Garden after the match. They were recognised by the old Bill and were told to move on, which they did. We got to the ground, but there was still no Millwall around. We were just getting the ones giving the abuse, calling us cheeky cunts for bringing a firm to Millwall and warning we would get what for afterwards. During the game, one of our lot went round collecting newspapers. The next thing you know, the refreshment stand is up in smoke. They managed to put it out before it got serious. It was a pretty uneventful day, and after the game, the old Bill escorted us back. 30 of us got away and had it off with about 30 Millwall at London Bridge and turned them over. We had just got on a train and they appeared on the platform, so we got off and had it with them before getting back on. One of our lot, Barrington, who is a former kickboxer and cage fighter, punched one of their lot so hard his feet lifted off the ground. After a few skirmishes outside the ground, the police escorted Blues back towards the tube, but around 90 lads managed to escape and split up into groups to make their own way to Euston before setting off for Brum. One group reached Euston only to find they had missed the train and plotted up in a bar at the station to wait for the next one. As they headed towards the platform, loads of Millwall suddenly came pouring through the doors. Nobody had gone to Covent Garden, and no doubt this had angered them, and they were on the warpath. The Zulus were very low on numbers, and they knew it. There wasn't much they could do, and they admit that if the police hadn't stepped in and formed a cordon, preventing Millwall from getting to them, they would have been slaughtered. That incident is definitely one where police intervention was appreciated. Everyone was enjoying a drink in and around John Bright Street before the game, at Christmas 1986, particularly in Boogie's, which was a favourite haunt of the Zulus back then, when a firm of Millwall appeared after arriving at New Street Station just around the corner. Some lads had been involved in the annual seasonal fun and games with the old Bill during a Zulu Christmas party the week before. They had been drinking in the Kaleidoscope near John Bright Street before encountering some Vila, and a dozen Blues started chasing them through the city, ending up near the law courts. Floyd did an amazing flying kick, which knocked out one of the Villa lot just before a bus pulled up, and a few more Villa lads got off and joined in. In the melee, Big C had taken a beating and suffered a shattered cheekbone and nose, resulting in a trip to hospital on Christmas Day. This injury meant he was forced to take a bit of a backseat during the proceedings with Millwall a few days later. When Millwall arrived, they made their presence known in the middle of John Bright Street, Major Blues territory. They announced who they were, which led to a full-on fight breaking out outside Boogie's. A pub full of Zulus set upon them, and unbeknown to Millwall, a load more were en route after drinking in the nearby Market Hotel. This meant they would be attacked from both sides and were left with nowhere to run. Although Millwall were prepared, one of their lads was seen brandishing a dog chain and whipping anyone who came near him. They couldn't beat the force and sheer numbers of the Zulus. They got totally bashed, and some even suffered the indignity of being stripped naked as they lay sprawled out on the cold concrete. That season, the game at St Andrews was a night match. As with most London teams, they never like to mention when they have been turned over, and this was one of those nights. We met in Boogie's Wine Bar in John Bright Street, our stronghold at the time. To be fair to Millwall, they are the only team that ever came there during the years we were there. They had done their homework. About 150 turned up, and we smashed them to smithereens. We had lads in other nearby bars, and Millwall got caught in the middle. They were squealing like pigs as they got smashed everywhere. They had nowhere to run as we slaughtered them. It was only the old Bill that ended up saving them from more punishment. It was Millwall's firm and their usual renter mob, as some of them were recognised as Spurs lads. After the game they were escorted to New Street, but their escort was attacked a few times. The following season, nothing happened home or away. It was a quiet time on the hooligan front as ecstasy had taken over. We went to their place in the early 90s, but not in big numbers. Nothing happened before the game, and afterwards we made our way to London Bridge Station. We had about 100 lads, which dwindled down to about 60, as it looked like nothing was happening. But, at about 6 p.m, a car pulled up outside the Boozer, and a Millwall lad said something like, "Wait, there's a firm coming." 30 minutes later, there was still no sign, so we decided to go looking for them. Me and Eddie M went ahead of everyone else, saw a mob of about 300 Millwall coming towards us, and I ran back to tell the others. Now usually I would be telling everyone to keep it tight and nobody run, but this time I said, I didn't fancy our chances, but we should give it a go. I remember some of them looking at me knowing it was on top, as they'd not heard me talk like that before. But there was no time to think, as suddenly a big roar went up from Millwall. We made a feeble attempt to throw some missiles, but it was pointless. This mob was coming at us, and nothing was stopping them, so it was about turn and on your toes. They ran us back to London Bridge Station. We ran back up the stairs, and I made a shout for us to try to get the advantage from the top of the stairs. Millwall came straight at us. As we ran up the stairs, they were right behind us. An arm came round me and emptied a tin of CS gas in my mouth. When I got to the top of the stairs, the old Bill were there. I bent over, spewing my guts up, and a copper just patted me on my back and said, "You've got what you came for." So, off I go again. Some of ours got chased and caught in the station restaurant, and I could hear the plates smashing. I ran up some stairs, ended up on my own, and found a little room to hide in. I could hear footsteps outside, and I was gasping for breath from the gas, but I had to hold my breath so they didn't hear me. I then heard over the tannoy system, "Will the people running up the tracks please come off before you get electrocuted?" I looked out of the window to see some of our lads running up the track. I wanted to burst out laughing because I knew they were not coming off the line to face that firm. I stayed where I was for a good while, and when I eventually came out, a few Millwall were still about. When I got on a train, a couple of our lads were on it, but we didn't even look at each other, let alone talk, until we got back to Euston. Everyone had their own story about how they got away that day, as it was definitely every man for himself. The lads who ran off down the tracks kept on running, and as they passed an old man in a string vest on another platform, he made a comment which they'll never forget. "That'll teach you to F about down here, won't it?" The next game at St Andrews we were out for revenge, but there wasn't much of a show from Millwall. When they did turn up, their train was late and came into New Street after the game had kicked off. This was the match when they put Blues fans above Millwall in the seats, and they got pelted. They even found a homemade bomb that hadn't gone off. After the game, the old Bill had to keep Millwall behind for about 40 minutes, as Blues were attacking the police to get at them. A police horse got stabbed. The old Bill ended up being the main target for Blues that day, but it wasn't the main Zulu lads. It was normal supporters and shirts, and a lot of young kids from Small Heath and Bordesley who come out when they know trouble is guaranteed. This fixture is a nightmare for the old Bill, as they not only have to worry about it going off with the fans, but over the years, Blues and Millwall are by a long way the worst teams for turning on them. That was what the Zulus had to say about Millwall. But now, I want to mention a newer Millwall firm, a slightly more secretive and hardcore one that have taken part in pre-arranged fights in forests and private Berserkers parks. Are a hooligan firm associated with Millwall Football Club, Berserkers, known for their active involvement in arranged fights, particularly with other clubs and firms in the UK and internationally. They are a younger, more organised firm compared to the older Millwall Bushwhackers. with members often following the fighting club mentality. The Millwall Berserkers are a relatively new firm, established around 2016, yet they have quickly gained notoriety among other firms in the UK. They are known for participating in organised fights with other clubs, including international ones like Paris FC, Sparta Prague and PSV. The Berserkers are composed of younger individuals from South London, and they are considered a highly active and game firm. Their actions have led to a growing reputation among other football firms, with many recognising them for their involvement in confrontations. I have left lots of content out of this video. I could have gone on and on about incidents and top faces. Maybe I will make a part 2. Let's see how it goes. But if you did enjoy this, can I ask that you give it a like and share it with your mates, whether they are Millwall lads or just fans of the football casual culture, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It really helps my channel. Thank you lads, good night, God bless. See you next time. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you subscribe, you will be notified when we release a new video. It could be your firm we make a video about next, so don't miss out and hit the subscribe button. You can find me on Facebook or email me if you have a good story to tell. See you next time.